Hey folks, this is Mr. Chicken, and we're now getting into the final video on assembling your animatronic Raven. You've got all your mechanics working, and now we're just going to cover it all up and make it look nice. You will have some short fur fabric in your kit, and you're going to want to split that into two pieces if it isn't already. And we're going to glue it onto the shells for the body. So I'm using Super 77 spray glue to do this. And if you don't have that, you could just hot glue it. Just be careful not to cover up the holes where you're going to screw those body shells down, and mind that you don't warp the plastic with hot glue. But I really like the 77 because it is really easy to apply and to line up, and you get a certain amount of kind of re-stick ability with it, which is nice when we get to sticking it down properly, and then also attaching the shells to the body. We can kind of peel it back a little bit to get at those screw holes a little easier. So as you're sticking it down, just try not to pull the body shell open and distort it. Try to move the fur to conform around the plastic instead of the other way around. So you just kind of work it into place, and there you go. Now, once you get both of them on, then what you want to do is take a blade or some scissors and just trim off the extra material. But we are going to leave some extra. We're going to leave it a little long in the tail to kind of blend that out, and we're going to leave some extra on the neck that will wrap in into the neck socket to hide that joint a little better. So we're just going to take it back over to the mechanical section, and we're just going to cut some slits into these little indents that accommodate the legs and the wings, but we just want to make sure that we're putting them in the right spot. So just kind of offer it up, check that your holes are lined up where the brackets are going to be, and then you can use that as a guide and just take your blade and make a little slit in the fur. And you might like to do a little test fit now, so you can just take your 1/4-inch screws and go along through all the holes that you drilled in the body shell and just screw it right down onto the brackets. Now we're going to cover the head, so you can cut out the fur fabric using the lines that have been drawn for you. And I would be a little generous in your cuts at first. Always better to have a little too much fabric, but that way you can just do what I'm doing here, which is to just trim back as needed so that you're not covering up the eyes. And so you just kind of test it, offer it up, trim away what you need to trim, and then keep going. And I'm just going to hot glue this down onto the head. So again, I'm not using a really hot glue gun. It's the lower temp so that I don't warp the plastic. But just a little line of glue on the fur and then press it down into place. Fun little trick with hot glue. If you ever glue something that you didn't mean to glue, you can use a little rubbing alcohol that'll break the seal and release that glue. So don't worry if you mess up a little bit. So I place down the middle, and then I'm going to go around the other side of the eye and get that down. And we're going to glue down the other side. So I just put my glue down, and then I kind of swing it around so that that dart in the fur meets up. You just kind of push and pull as you have to. And then a little glue down like this. And we're going to glue down, making sure that the mouth is wide open, because that fur can restrict us later if it isn't. So we'll just glue down like so, and do the same thing on the other side. And place it. And then I'm going to just kind of trim the corner of the mouth a little bit to give that a little nicer shape. And I'm also going to take a little snip into that corner of the mouth, so that when it closes up, it doesn't pinch. Now you can take your craft foam here, which is going to be the sort of structure of the wings. So here's where we get into the feathers. These are your larger feathers, and what you want to do is sort through them. You're going to notice as you start working with these that they're curved, and there actually are left and right and center feathers in your mix. So I just go through the stack and match up the ones that are curved in the same directions. And if it doesn't really have much of a curve, then I'll put it in the middle. And you'll see as you're working with them. If you start to mix ones that are curved in different directions, then they won't really lay together very well. So you just want to sort them to match up as best you can. And then it's time to start figuring out where you're going to stick them down. So I just kind of checked and made sure that it was going to work out right. This is basically the layout we're going to be doing, just tiling them up. So a little hot glue on the stem, and careful not to burn your fingers, right? I just do them one at a time, starting from the outside of the wing and working in. And we're putting these down a little ways from that top curve, so that we can kind of control the length that we want. And so you just, one at a time, place them down. And it's a good time to mention that if you want your bird to have wings that are more outstretched, you can just cut your own piece of foam that has a wider spread on it. Then we're going to get into our smaller feathers, which is going to be the next layer on top. So we sort these the same way that we did the other ones. It's maybe a little clearer to see the difference on these. So then we're going to tile these on exactly the same way. But these ones have much longer stems than we need, so we're just going to trim off the stems on each of these before we glue them down. And now we're going to glue them down exactly the same way that we did the larger ones, tiling them in from the outside in, one by one. It's kind of fun. I enjoy this part. And you'll notice that the curve on the feathers is not just sort of left-right, but there's also an up-down curve. So right now you'll see all the feathers are curving downward. But later on we'll end up having some that curve the other way. We'll get there. So that's what you get when you do both of them. So we're just going to clean up any stray edges there to get a nice little curve. So then you want to bend that brass strip. We're going to move it a little bit forward to give us a better spot to anchor the wing. But also you'll notice that it's the wrong direction. So we're going to put a little twist in it as well. Checking that we like where that is. And then we're going to bend it forward, out, and give it a little twist so that that wing can lay flat on it. And then we'll do the other side to match. I like the pliers to make that a nice clean and tight bend. Less important on this part. And so we're going to match the same bends that we did on the first side. And then you can offer up the wings, make sure you like how it fits. And I had a little extra brass on the ends there, so I just snipped that off. I've got some heavy-duty scissors, but you could also do like tin snips or something like that. And then I'm just going to hot glue the wings onto the brass. Now, if you're worried about it being a stronger hold than this, what you could do is drill some small holes into the brass and then just stitch the wings down in addition to the glue. But the glue has held up fine for me. Not a bad idea to take some rough sandpaper, though, and scratch up that brass so it's got a little more grip. So I just glue one down and glue the other one down. And, you know, take a little care to make sure that they are symmetrical when you do that. And now, you know, there's just some extra foam underneath that we don't really need anymore. So I'm just going to trim that away past the brass. So here, what I'm going to do is take some more of those short feathers, and I'm going to treat this almost like it's the top of the wing. And so I'm using the feathers that are curved the opposite way so that they will lay over that brass and foam and cover it all up really nicely. Now, because I'm using the Palalu Maestro to control this bird, I'm just going to go ahead and hot glue it inside because it'll fit. And then the only thing I'll need to run to the bird from outside is the power cord. So glob of glue and stick it right on there. Fits very nicely, actually. And so now here I've got my power cord, and we're going to feed it up through the leg. Now, on the real thing, what I'll do is drill a hole in the base to feed that up nice and neatly. But what you're going to end up doing is just sliding that cord up through the leg. You got to kind of work it through a little bit. But that's the nice thing about the latex being flexible, is we can do this. And then I'm going to loop it around the back of the leg, the hip structure, and then I can plug right into the body. Now, if you're going to do this, what you really want to do is have another plug on the other end of that wire, because once you close up the body, you're not going to be able to get to this plug to unplug the power like that. So give yourself another little connection further down that wire so that you can get to it. And I've just gone ahead and bundled up the extra servo wires, making sure to leave slack in the wire that goes to the head so it can still move. And I just taped those together. So here we go. Now we're going to start closing things up for real. So I rolled over the neck fur, and now we're going to slip the body shells over the top of that. So we sort of hide the seam in the length of the fur. And so fit it into place, and then you're going to go along the edges, find those holes that you drilled in the shell, and use those 1/4 inch 440 screws to hold the body shell into place. And the great thing about doing it this way is that even though we're going to seal over the fur, if you ever need to get in there to do any adjustments to your servos or to your wiring, you can pretty easily just pull back the fur along that seam and undo those screws and pop both shells open if you need to, which is really, really useful. And now, before we start any further, just give her another test run and make sure that everything moves correctly. I'm going to go ahead and attach the tail feathers. So I've taken those center curveless feathers that we set aside when we were doing the wings, and I'm going to glue about 5 of those onto the tail, just hot gluing right onto that little stub of fur fabric on the end there. And I start with the middle and then just sort of tile out from there, a couple on each side. Easy enough, right? Now, one thing we still need to address is the edge of those wings. So what I do is I take these little fluffy feathers, and we're going to use those to conceal that funky edge. So I trim off the stem on there, which gives you uh, kind of a messy little bit there. There's some ends that you have to kind of make sure you hold together, but then we just glue those down. I kind of glue it just to the underside where you won't see where that starts, um, and just tile a few along. So then we're going to put a gloss over all that fur. Um, Now there's a few things you can use. You're going to use some sort of an acrylic gloss. Um, What you can do is get the stuff from the art store, gloss medium, or sometimes you can get in the craft aisle these little tiny bottles of various sorts. But I'm going to use a different thing. I'll tell you about it in a second. But I use a cut down chip brush, and I actually add a little drop of black paint into my gloss. Just to be sure that if it ends up thick in any spots, that it'll still be dark and won't get you any kind of weird little milky areas. So the stuff that I'm using is actually from the hardware store. It's called polyacrylic, and it's made to seal like decks, and it comes in a big gallon, so it'll last you forever. And I just decant it into a smaller container so that I can use it. And so we do over the fur, and then I'm also going to get those weird little fluffy guys on the edge of the wings. And see, now we can just sort of seal down any of those weird little strays, and give a nice shape to the wing, um, and shape it that way. Now, the head um, is a little more interesting. Um, because of the longer fur, we're going to kind of make sure that we work that gloss in there to really hold it down, because we don't want to make a lot of volume on the head itself. But you just kind of go along, and you can kind of, you're sort of using the brush to comb the fur into shape, which can give you some help around the eyes, getting some character in there. Um, but we also we're going to go ahead and get that gloss onto the eyeball and onto the beak. Um, we're going to take care not to put the gloss over the neck area, because that's where we're going to get all that neck movement, and we don't want to restrict that with the gloss, because the gloss will dry stiff. So leave just past the skull. You're going to leave that untouched. Now, a note about the eyes that I don't think I've mentioned yet is that those are actually exactly the same size as a 10 millimeter LED. So if you're going to want to put glowing eyes into your bird, you can just cut those right out and glue in a 10 millimeter red LED, and you'll be in good shape. Now, I did put a second coat on the body because the first soaked up a lot. And you can see that I also put that gloss right onto the latex feet. And now I'm going to take some scraps of fur that we had left over from covering the body and use that to transition the legs from the body. So both sides of that. And then we're going to go ahead and use some more scraps of fur to cover up the brass under the wing, glue it down. You could also use the scrap fur to do the top of the wing if you wanted to. I thought that it was a little conspicuous that way, so what I used is some more of the little leftover fluffy feathers, but you could use the other types of feathers too if you'd rather, and I just glued that down. I didn't want to shellac these with the gloss like the other ones because we are getting movement out of this spot, so I wanted to make sure I wasn't inhibiting anything. But you can take your little scissors and trim them down so they're not flying all over the place. And now check it out again, because you should have a functional bird. You're going to want to mount it to something, right, other than that little scrap of wood that we had going earlier. I mounted mine to a book, and the way that I did that is I just measured over the holes that I had in the test board, and then I drilled those into the cover of the book. And I drilled the power wire all the way through the book so that that could come right out. And then take those 1/2 inch 440 screws, and you can screw the feet into place. Of course, you could also mount it to anything else you wanted. I mean, a tree branch or a skull maybe. And you could always get longer 440 screws at the hardware store if you needed to. But there you go. You should have built yourself a working animatronic raven. So thanks for following along with me through all of this. I hope that if you're building a kit right now, that this walked you through everything you needed. And if you're thinking about getting one, I hope it gave you enough information to feel like you can go ahead and tackle this yourself. If you have any questions, you can of course contact me on my website, but I really do recommend that you check out the Facebook group for everybody who's building these ravens. There's a lot of resources being put up there which will help you, and of course if you've come up with any cool tricks or modifications to the kit, I'd really appreciate it if you'd share with everybody in the group so that everybody can learn together. So thanks for sticking with me through all these videos. I know you could have watched a fun movie instead, but I think this has been good. So enjoy your animatronic ravens.